Nathan Bransford is a very good friend of mine. He's a well-known blogger in the publishing space at nathanbransford.com. He's a former literary agent from Curtis Brown and the author of the JACOB WONDERBAR series. Thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us today. And the reason we're here is Nathan's the author of How to Write a Novel. There's a second edition that just came out.
Yep.
Congratulations on that. And there's just so much in this book that I want to talk about. So much ground to cover today.
Excellent.
So
Let's do it.
yeah, I'm excited to get started. The first thing, and your very first rule, is on belief, which is such a big thing for an author, to believe in themselves. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with self-belief?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spent a lot of time telling myself I was not a creative person. I think that we have this idea of what a creative person is like and what that entails, and the lifestyle, and hard partying and alcohol and drugs and all these things, and I just didn't really fit that criteria. And so I spent a lot of time thinking that I wasn't really a creative person, that this dream that I had of writing books wasn't really possible. In fact, when I was a literary agent, I prided myself on being one of those literary agents who wasn't secretly working on a book, and then I started secretly working on a book. And so I think that a lot of people get trapped in this idea of not believing in themselves and the possibility of what their book can be. And so one of the things I try and do in How to Write a Novel is really try and shake people out of that. And you are creative enough to write a novel. You can do it. The harder thing is the time it takes to write the novel and to stay focused and committed enough to do it. But the first thing is just believing that it's possible and shaking your preconceived ideas about what a creative person is like.
And you mentioned that when you wrote your first novel and the first JACOB WONDERBAR book, you had a full-time job, or more than full-time job,
totally.
as you put.
Yeah, I was a literary agent at the time, and the first novel that I wrote was not JACOB WONDERBAR. It was a different novel for adults. And I wrote that while I was maintaining a job as a literary agent, which is a really time-intensive job. I was working 8 to 8 on the weekdays, and then I'd write Saturday and Sunday. And so it was a really intense time, but I did it. And the first one didn't work out, and then I really didn't think this dream was possible. But I had this idea for a kid trapped on a planet full of substitute teachers, and then I just went with it, and then the end result was JACOB WONDERBAR.
And I just briefly want to touch on the way you plan your novels now. And you use something, you were inspired by J.K. Rowling's spreadsheet.
Right.
And do you feel like it would be a useful tool for authors? Can you talk a little bit about how you use it?
Yeah, I've evolved in terms of the way that I plan my books. And so when I first started out, all writers kind of fall in some spectrum between total seat of the pantsers and total planners. I have started in the middle, where I sort of had an idea of some places I wanted to hit, and some of the major events along the way, and what maybe the climax was going to be, but I didn't plan too much in advance. But then for my most recent novel that I just finished, I saw J.K. Rowling's spreadsheet for Order of the Phoenix, and it really kind of like a light bulb went off in just what's possible. And what she does is essentially traces all the plot lines of all the major characters with across the top, and then on the left you have the chapters. And you can just sort of plot out what's happening and see if everything fits together. And the great thing about it is that it allows you to kind of get above your novel and kind of just see if everything's fitting together in a cohesive way. But even then, the best outlines are only as good as how they work on the page. And so even as well as I outline now, sometimes I'll get it on the page and I'll just be like, oh my God, this makes no sense. So you have to be able to adjust, but that's the approach that I took with my most recent novel.
That's good to know that it's okay if it doesn't work on the page.
Yeah.
You can go back and revise.
That's the real test.
We'll provide a link to, you have helpful advice on how to...
I have an outline, a version of that I created for my blog readers that has that structure of the outline that you can then fill in with your own novel.
Perfect. So we'll have that here. Let's talk about character motivation. I love the way you broke it down and how to write a novel. How are we supposed to think about motivation?
Yeah, I think it's one of the absolute most important elements of any plot. The main character has to want something. And it's better if that thing that they want is very much tied up in their identity and who they are as a human being, and that it's something that's very big and that they're actively going after. I personally think that one of the major reasons that we read novels is because we want to become invested in what a character wants, and then see how they go and get it, and how they try and overcome the obstacles that creep up along the way. And so it's so important to start with that thing that character wants. And in genre novels, this is often easy. It's like saving the kingdom or saving the galaxy or what have you. But even with literary fiction, memoir, and other types of novels, it's still important to show that thing that character is going after, and that's why we're invested in them as someone who wants something, because we all want something. We all want to go after these things in our own lives, and it's helpful knowledge to see how someone else goes about it, and we learn about them as they do it. I actually believe in motivation so much that I also think it's an important element in chapters, and that if we should always know, even at the chapter level, what the character's mindset is at the start of the chapter and what it is that they're going after, so that we're constantly in the mindset of going after something.
And when you think about motivation at a chapter level, do you look at the whole scope, the scope of the character's motivation and their goals for the entire novel, and kind of break it down by chapter, or is it some?
It might vary by chapter, and so, for instance, the overall motivation might be to save the galaxy, but in this particular chapter, it might be a subplot, or it might be something else that the character is going after. And so, and it's also not a hard and fast rule. I mean, sometimes characters just need to be quiet. Sometimes there needs to be diversions, and there's it's not like a universal thing, but even in my chapter outline, so I outline chapters too. I start with what's the character's mindset, what's on their mind, where are they at, and what do they want in this chapter. And then it's whenever a novel feels lost or when it starts feeling slow, chances are it's because the character is either being passive, like things are happening to the character, but the character isn't trying to go after something, or they just don't know what they want, and they're just kind of like lost, and then the reader feels lost.
Right. And can you talk about the difference between external motivation and internal motivation, and the interplay, or how you think of it?
Yeah, I tend to. So there are a lot of like screenwriting and writing craft books that really kind of push people to think about external and internal motivations. I tend to think of these personally in a little bit less of a concrete way. I think of it a little bit differently, where I just try and make sure that the thing that the character wants is bound up with who they are as a human being. So it's not just this like thing where they want to do this thing so they can get rich, but then why do they want to get rich? What are they specifically going to do with the money? What does that say about them as a human being and the things they care about? So like, do they just want to get rich, or do they want to like take care of their friends? Do they want to live a fancy lifestyle? Like, what do they imagine as they're thinking about becoming rich? And then when you have that level of nuance around that big thing that they want, the internal stuff kind of works itself out, because you kind of know intuitively, oh, this person's greedy, or oh, this person's empathetic, or whatever qualities that they display by seeing the thing that they want, the way they go after it, and the trade-offs they make along the way. Right.
And just to bring in a concrete example, if you could talk about the first JACOB WONDERBAR book, and at the end, his two competing motivations.
Yeah. So in the JACOB WONDERBAR series, his dad had moved away from home when he was 12, and then in the beginning of the novel, Jacob and his friends trade a corn dog for a spaceship and blast off into space, and they have all these crazy adventures. Gradually, as Jacob is in space, he begins to suspect that his dad might be a space human who's lost in space, and he receives this clue that maybe his dad was in outer space all along. And on the other hand, his friends really want to get home because they've been gone for a long time. They're worried about their parents, and their lives are waiting for them back on Earth. And so Jacob has to kind of make a final choice between, does he stay out in space or does he go home with his friends? And so I do think that it's great if characters want more than one thing, and if those things can occasionally be in opposition to each other or bump up against each other, so that the character has to make a final choice about the thing that is most important to them. And in this case, he chose his friends over this possibility of finding his dad.
I thought that was really
spoiler. It's not that much of a spoiler.
No, I thought that was really great because, as you said, that's what really reveals a character to the reader.
Is the choices they make.
I mean, usually it's very clear cut,
Mm-hmm.
but something like that where it's, finding his father versus going back with his friends.
Yeah, so it's great if you are able to find a couple things that the character really wants and that are in tension with each other.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens naturally. I wouldn't try to force it, but I think it's what makes characters feel more nuanced and well-rounded. Sometimes plots and characters can be a little bit linear.
Yeah.
And it's more interesting if we not only are we seeing how they're trying to go after a big thing, but they're at odds with these their own competing desires. Like you can't. There's this saying I once heard that. You can have anything, but you can't have everything.
Yeah.
And so having to choose between the possibility that you're going to decide on is a compelling choice to make in the climax. And
this is actually closely related to Rule 24. Be mysterious.
Oh, okay. I don't have them memorized.
Oh, okay. So, and I thought this was really interesting because usually when you think about mystery, at least I didn't think about it along these terms.
Yeah.
So if you can talk about the importance of mystery in any genre.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I often see when I'm editing authors' manuscripts is that people know that a mystery is good. They want to create a mystery, even if it's not a mystery novel. It's good to have a mystery in a novel. And so what people do is they just leave out information. And what happens is that often, instead of creating a mystery, the reader just doesn't know what's going on entirely. And so it becomes a little bit more annoying than mysterious, because you're just like, I just want to know what's happening. And I'm trying to piece everything together, and I don't have enough information to even understand the contours of what's going on. So to me, a good mystery is really tied to that motivation, and it's the best mysteries are around is the character going to get what they want? That's the mystery. And so if you think of a murder mystery, the detective or Sherlock Holmes or whomever wants to figure out who it is, and so it's tied to the character's desire. Is he going to figure out who did it? And then we see the cleverness and all of the other things that they have to do in order to find that thing out. And so it's not a mystery if the reader can't wrap their head around what is missing and what the character needs. But also, it's tough to care about a mystery if it's not bound up in what that character wants, because again, we're identifying with what the character wants, and we'll care much more about the mystery if it's very important to the main character. If you think about, for instance, some of the mysteries in the Harry Potter novels, such as what's going on with Snape, for instance, it's very much bound up in Harry and his safety and sort of defeating Voldemort and all of these other things that are very, very, very important to what the core characters want. And what's missing is a piece of information, which is which side is Snape on. And that, to me, is the best kind of mystery, because it's so deeply bound up in what matters in the novel. But it's the mystery is not who is Snape entirely. It's like this very specific thing, which is Snape's ultimate allegiance.
I also thought it was great. You pointed out that a mistake that's often made is the writer will withhold information from the reader that the protagonist
Yeah.
has.
Right.
And that feels very...
Yeah. So often what you'll see is, especially in first-person narratives, it feels unwieldy for the reader to not know what the main character knows. And you can get away with it a little bit. Sometimes the narrator might be unreliable, or maybe you can kind of create a little bit of a delay just by virtue of circumstance and things like that. But in general, the best mysteries tend to be where the reader knows what the character knows. And so in the case of Harry Potter, we know what Harry knows. We know about as much as about Snape's motivations as Harry. And the Harry Potter novels are mostly written in third person limited. And so we see what Harry sees, and that's the kind of effective mystery, as opposed to Harry knowing all along about Snape and we're just waiting to finally find out what Harry knows. That would have been a lot more annoying.
And can you just touch on how this is used in romance as well, just as a different sort of genre example?
Yeah, so I mean, in the case of romance, it's often, are they going to get together or are they not going to get together? Or is, a lot of it has to do with motivation and deducing someone's true intent and things that are hidden from us as human beings, and we have to find evidence to support our understanding of another person. And so if you want to end up with somebody, it's important to know their true intent. That's mysterious, and so we go forward and do everything we can to try and get the evidence that we need. And so again, it's bound up in motivation, desire, and that just crucial piece of information that we're missing.
And the obstacles are all those misunderstandings.
All those misunderstandings and false starts, and yeah, totally.
When you talk about conflict, you say that the basic rhythm is grasped by the reader within the first 50 pages. And then the reader expects that tempo, obviously to increase, but that's where it's set.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that and how an author should think about,
right,
the importance of setting that tempo?
Yeah, so conflict, so once you have motivations and every character should want something, that then inevitably begins to introduce conflict, because what characters want are at odds with each other, and we should see those things bumping up against each other. You often hear people talk about pacing, about novel pacing, and which is kind of like the flow of a novel, where there's some novels that are very frenetic and things happen very fast. If you think of like the Da Vinci Code, it had very short chapters. There was always something happening. It was like very, very fast pacing. Whereas some literary novels might unfold more slowly and have slower, a slower pace. And really the way that I think about that is intervals of conflict. And so if you think of an action novel, there's constantly conflict happening. There's action, there's constantly people bumping up against each other. Whereas in a more ruminative novel like Gilead, for instance, there's conflict in the novel, definitely, and there are moments of small climaxes, but a lot of it is slow and introspective and it's still, I find it personally, Page Turns is an incredible book, but it just feels, it's a different reading experience and it feels like a different pace. And so the way I think of pacing is intervals of conflict, and the reader begins to internalize a rhythm. And so if Gilead started out for the first 100 pages of a man ruminating on passing and his son never really knowing him, and then all of a sudden a gun battle erupts in the middle of the book and suddenly he's on the run, it would be very confusing.
Yeah.
And so it's important to sort of abide by the sort of contract you're establishing with the reader, or at least if you're going to break it and change it, have a very, very good reason for doing it.
Right. So you wrote, don't just raise the stakes for your character in the external world. Give them internal stakes as well. Once the characters make their final choices, we talked about this, your reader will truly feel as if they know who these characters are.
Yeah.
So yeah, we kind of touched on that, but if you want to expand on
that. So the stakes are kind of a way of thinking about all of this in a way. It's you often hear editors especially saying, I raise the stakes, nothing feels like it's at stake. And so I think there are two ways of thinking about stakes. One is making what's happening matter in the exterior world, and so saving the world has, you know, a grander stakes than something more individual and personal. But to me, the best novels also, even if the character is trying to save the entire galaxy, that it's brought back to who they are as a human being, and so we care more about it because it's more personally important to the character. And so I think a good example of this is actually Star Wars. So for instance, Luke Skywalker is literally trying to save the galaxy, but then it becomes extremely personal because he's trying to save his friends. You know, his father is in the mix, and so he is not only not only are the stakes high for everyone in the galaxy, but it's also for him as an individual and as a character. And so when you're trying to raise the stakes, I think it's a matter of both considering expanding the canvas of the novel, but that doesn't work for all novels, and I wouldn't try and universalize that. But more importantly, make it more important to who the character is as a human, and give them more reasons to care. So back to the example of a character who's trying to be rich, it's that why, and like making it matter. And then so another way of thinking of it is what happens if the character wins and what happens if the character loses, and giving them better rewards and more downside. And so if a character, like let's say the character doesn't get rich, what are they risking? Are they going to be destitute? Are they going to be humiliated? And so giving both a sense of a very clear reward and a very clear risk if they fail will really clarify the stakes for the reader. Is
it always explicit? What will happen if they fail?
It can be implicit. It can, but I tend to think that it's usually best to articulate it in a specific way, because we learn about the character by the way that they think about these things.
Right.
And so, when it's life or death, it's implied. I mean, if a character is being, chased by an axe murderer, we don't need to literally see them think of like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't die. And so like sometimes it's implicit. Yeah. But like when in the case of a character who's pursuing their passion or their dream, what you'll often see is that we get that they want to like achieve, like follow their dreams and become successful and all these other things, but sometimes we don't see enough of. But what if they don't? Wouldn't that be fine too? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you give them a much deeper, pit to fall into if they don't succeed, then we're going to be gripped a little bit more by watching them walk that tightrope across the pit, because it's like, okay, well, if they don't make this work, then it's going to be really bad, and then we get more invested as a result of that.
And I love the way you talk about mountains of intensity, the protagonist experiencing really high highs and really low lows right before or right around the climax.
Right.
And having all the climactic arcs come together. Right. And the more, the better. So how do we do that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so this is very, very old storytelling theory. It goes starting with Aristotle all the way through every plot framework book that was written in the 20th century. But basically, the idea is that the obstacles should increase in intensity as you go along, and so you get over the smallest humps first, and then you ascend. And it's kind of like playing a video game where you defeat the easy guys, and then you get to the boss at the end of the level. And
this is true for all genres.
All genres, and even literary fiction, where it's more subtle in literary fiction, but you can still see it where. The character things get more intense, and things start to matter more, and the stakes become higher. And then in classic storytelling, there's like a nadir where all hope seems lost, and then the character might in the depths summon their last courage, and then have to use the things that they've learned in order to summon the mountain and finally defeat the bad guy. And so a lot of classic genre novels or classic plot frameworks have that nadir as like when the all hope seems lost moment, followed by the final triumphant victory. Even if you don't use something quite that stark, I do think it's important to have ups and downs throughout. Things should never always be good; they should never always be bad, and it kind of varies the experience for the reader, but also the protagonists should go through good and bad times, and we learn more about them by seeing their ups and downs, their good sides and bad sides, and then everything builds towards that final climax.
Just thinking from a planning standpoint, and I guess you refer to it as flagpoles.
Mm-hmm.
When you say flagpoles, it's usually the points of the novel that
Right.
you kind of want to hit, that you know you
Right.
want to hit.
Right.
And how do you think about making sure that it's progressively, that you're progressively getting more and more climactic?
Yeah, so a lot of people will call these act climaxes, but essentially I have 4 or 5 points that I know I want to hit along the way that are kind of act climaxes, or I call them temples because I think of it as like these like heightened moments of intensity, and then things kind of calm down, but they build to the next one. They tend to be moments when something really crucial happens, where it's like a point of no return. So for instance, in one of the in the first JACOB WONDERBAR novel, the characters blast off into space, but then they break the universe, and suddenly the path to back to Earth is blocked, and so it's a point of no return. Now they're lost in space and they don't know how to get back. And so and then you build these moments, and then the characters at one point get separated, which is another tentpole where now not only are they lost, they're separated.
I'm laughing because you're supposed to have no mercy on your characters.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Don't be too easy on your characters. And so so not only are they moments of no return or when dramatic things happen, but it's helpful if multiple plot lines intersect in a key way. Mm-hmm. And so in JACOB WONDERBAR, Jacob begins. He develops this rivalry with a space pirate, and his friends kind of think the space pirate's kind of interesting. He hates him, and so he starts to feel like a little bit jealous about the way that his friends think about the space pirate. And so when the kids get split up, it kind of cleaves that simmering conflict, and then it makes it much worse because Sarah goes off with the space pirate, Dexter's stuck with Jacob, and so then Jacob's like simmering even more, and it's a misunderstanding, but now Jacob has a reason to be mad at Sarah, but maybe it's a misunderstanding, and you're just kind of like turning the screws on the simmering conflicts that you've created.
You talk about how an author should never construct a scene around dialogue.
Well, it's tough to say never, but at least think about it.
Yeah.
At least think about it.
Why is that?
I think we've been really internalized movies and TV shows as we write, and so when we envision scenes, often what we're seeing or hearing are the characters talking to each other, and I think it's a really dangerous approach for a couple different reasons. One, if it's all just dialogue, we're not getting the other cues that are so important for us to be able to contextualize a scene. So when we're watching two characters talk on a TV show or movie, there's so much more that we're absorbing. We're absorbing the setting, the facial expressions, the gestures, the actor's physical presences. So if it's just dialogue on the page, we're not even getting all the things that we get from the movies and TV. Let alone that novels tend to be more interior and more about the sort of internal desires and motivations to a deeper degree than movies and TV shows are, because those are on the surface, whereas in novels we can literally delve into people's heads in a much more intimate way than is possible in those other mediums. So I always push authors, even if you have a dialogue-oriented novel, to provide those details so that the reader can situate themselves in the scene, picture what's going on, see the gestures, get the presence, make sure that all of that nuance is there. I think one of the biggest things I see when I'm editing authors' manuscripts is just not enough physical description to like put us in the scene. And sure, don't go on forever, and if that's important to you, and you don't have to be one of the 19th century authors who were paid by the word and had 2 pages of description for everything. But at least set the scene. And I think an example of this is Elmore Leonard, where, I think I used that example in How to Write a Novel. He comes as close as anybody to write dialogue-centric novels, but he still has enough key details to make sure that we're situated and we know where we are and what's happening.
As you say, it's so easy for an author to look at a page of their own dialogue, and they hear and see so much in their head that's actually not on the page for the reader. And it feels so flat. And
totally. You forget that you know exactly what's happening, but unless you tell the reader, then they don't know. So I mean, it is many books, as you're right. It's so easy to get that wrong and to forget it, because it's when you're reading your own work, you're filling in all those details, and it's hard to put yourself in the shoes of a reader who is not in your head.
Yeah, and talking about internalizing, as you put it, the thousands of hours of movies and TV shows that we've immersed ourselves in our entire lives.
Yeah.
You say that a lot of us tend to, in other ways, also write cinematically.
Mm-hmm.
And do you kind of want to talk about how we can bring in the other senses that in exposition as well? And
I mean, I think thinking cinematically is great. I mean, one of my very favorite plot framework books is Story by Robert McKee, which is a screenplay book. And I think that TVs and movies have done an incredible job of pushing plot forward and sort of tightly constructed but nuanced but interesting stories. And I think it'd be naive to not adapt novels and with that in mind, because that's what the readers' expectations are shaped by that as well. But as you think cinematically, I think it's so important to think not just in terms of what characters are saying, but much more about what characters are doing. And making sure that things aren't just talked through, but if it can be handled through action or gestures or movement, it's so much more interesting than just sitting and watching 2 characters talk about something in this amount of time. Like, a lot of times big important mysteries are revealed through one character telling it to another character, which can be okay. But what if the characters have to go and discover it for themselves, and or find out about it in a way that puts them in danger? And I think Harry Potter is a great example of this. I think J.K. Rowling does a fantastic job of not just having Dumbledore sit Harry down and tell him a bunch of information that he needs to know, but instead they have the pensive, and Harry gets to go and see it for himself, or he sees some things because of the invisibility cloak, and so there's a little element of danger. And so making exposition handling exposition as a result of the character doing something is so much better than just 2 characters sitting and talking to each other.
Right, the info dump.
Yeah.
And so let's say the first draft of a manuscript has just been completed. Mm-hmm. Hallelujah! Yeah. Big deal. Yeah. What's next? Yeah. You just send it off to an agent.
Yeah,
just publish it right away.
Done. It's perfect. It's amazing. Yeah. No. In my guide to writing a novel, I have that moment where it's sort of like, definitely celebrate.
Yeah.
Have that moment. You have totally done a really amazing accomplishment. You should feel good about yourself. You've written a draft of a novel, and then it's time to get back to work because it probably sucks. And that's
okay. That's
fine.
Expected.
Everyone's first draft sucks. I mean, it's like that's just part of the process. Yeah. So then you have to embark on a journey that somehow you never knew is going to be even more painful, which is looking critically at your own work and getting feedback and getting it as polished as possible. So no matter whether you're finding an agent, whether you're self-publishing, your novel has to be as good as you can possibly make it on your own before you even send it to an agent, before you even try and consider self-publishing. And what that means is that first you need to self-edit and kind of get as far as you can on your own, which is a really, really hard and painful process. I mean, there's nothing like spending hundreds of hours on a novel and then reading it with a mind for seeing all the reasons it's not good. It's just psychologically extremely difficult. Yeah. And I mean, it really, when I go through a revision, I have a hard time just even being in a good mood during the days. I mean, it's just like, because you read it and you're just like, all you can see is how bad it is. But just know that it's normal. And now it's a little better because I at least know it's normal and that I've experienced it a few times. But it's hard. Oh, it's so painful. So then when you get it as far as you can on your own, then you need feedback. And that can either be from a paid editor, if you have the resources, or a critique partner, friends and significant others. But you should get a couple different perspectives and some feedback from people you trust. Then you go back to work and do it all over again, and try and incorporate those changes and get it into a place that you're happy with. And then when you absolutely cannot think of anything else to make it better, and you're just making minor tweaks that aren't going to matter in the grand scheme of things, and when you think it's a steaming pile of garbage, that's when it's time to send it to an agent or to consider self-publishing it. At that point, you're probably not going to think it's very good, and that's okay. It's fine, but like it's when you can't think of anything else you can possibly do.
And at that point, how many times have you read it?
I can't like dozens to 100 probably.
Yeah. That's good to know. It's good to have a number, or a range that to have in mind, because sometimes you think, have I done enough? I think that's the biggest question that we get. I don't know when I've done enough.
Yeah. I mean, so I self-edit along the way, and so I'll go back and read things and tweak things and kind of just keep it in mind. When I'm done, I don't read it dozens of times after I'm finished with it. I'll probably do one big, long, slow one where I flag a bunch of things that I think are bad. And then what I do is I prioritize my changes, and so I sort of assemble all the things I know I need to do. Then I rank them from biggest to smallest, and biggest, most impactful to smallest, and then I make the biggest changes first, regardless of where they fall in the novel. And the reason for that is it's more efficient, because if you make small tweaks that might get swallowed by the big changes, then you just wasted your time on the small tweaks. And so if you go big to small, you save yourself from double doing. But so I'll probably read it 3 to 5, 7, 10 more times during that stage, then get feedback, then do it all over again 3, 5, 7 times, and then finally just get so tired of it I have to get it out there.
That's a great way of organizing your thoughts about it, though, having that list and then switching it around in terms of priorities. Yeah,
I think that's true, even if it's self-editing, but also if you when I get an editorial letter from an editor, I first read it through and then identify all the changes I'm going to make and not make. There's some changes you're going to get from an editor where you're like, no, I'm not doing that. And that's fine. But for the most part, you should listen at least. And then once I've identified the changes, then I rank them.
That's so smart. You know what I had been doing? Rereading the editorial memo over and over again.
Like, well, that's important too. I mean, it's important. Well, so I compare editorial letters to radioactive substances that you have to become acclimated to over time, because it's so painful to read them that you kind of have to just like read it until you can read it without freaking out. And so the first step is just reading it a bunch of times. Then once you can calm down and you know what's in there, you can kind of then go forward.
I love that analogy, and it takes a couple of days to acclimate to the radioactive substance of the letter. You
kind of have to just glance at it and then put it away, and then kind of you build up your resistance to it. And I don't know. This is a crazy process. Why do we do this?
I don't know. Why do we do this? Thank you so much, Nathan, for taking the time today. I got so much value out of How to Write a Novel. We recommend it all the time. And I'm so happy you came out with the second edition.
Yeah, thank you so much.